I didn't expect paperwork to feel like a slap, but that's what it was. Bradley Horn slid a single page across the table and said, flatly, 65% reduction. Effective Monday. No preamble, no apology, just numbers. Bolded, like gravity. The room stayed polite. My pulse did not. I asked one question. Evenly. Is this a request or a threat? He blinked, annoyed by the pause I created. He didn't answer my question. He didn't need to. He thought, the air inside the room is scorching hot, but it's freezing cold where I live. I just had to drink my second glass of warm water because my cold is still lingering. How about where you live? What's the temperature like right now? If you're still sitting here with me, please tell me your lucky number. I think you need to know more. Bradley runs human capital optimization. He's brilliant with spreadsheets and allergic to people. I've never seen him speak to a client. Never watched him sit through a renewal call or clean up a compliance scare. I do that work. When he threw the paper across the table, he thought I would nod. He thought I needed the job. But he was wrong. The paper stayed between us. A quiet dare. I smiled because anger would have pleased him. I smiled because he expected fear. I'll need 45 minutes. I said. Not a day, not a night. 45 minutes. He laughed, short and dismissive. Certain time favored him. I stood, calm, already rearranging the next hour in my head. I wasn't asking permission. I was claiming space, and for the first time in that meeting, Bradley looked unsure. I felt the insult settle, heavy and precise, and understood that the meeting wasn't about savings at all, but obedience, and whether I would bow today, quietly, without witnesses, or mercy. From that point onward, the story is no longer simple. I also want to add this. What follows contains fictional elements and is supported by artificial intelligence to highlight the humanistic message and emotional experience. Hopefully, you will find something for yourself. If not, take good care of yourself, and we'll meet again later. Anger didn't arrive all at once. It built itself carefully. The way this decision had. I remembered the early days, when the company was loud, messy, and half-blind. I built the account compliance framework from scratch because no one else would. I mapped risk, standardized client controls, and stitched legal language to revenue reality. Twice, federal inquiries stopped at our door and went no further because I was prepared. 2 contracts survived intact because I was. Then the acquisition happened, and Bradley Horn appeared like a professional undertaker. He called it optimization. Salaries were trimmed, titles stayed, workloads grew teeth. People were told to be grateful while being hollowed out. I watched capable managers escorted into training sessions designed to replace them. I was expected to do the same. Quietly, efficiently, smiling while sharpening the blade. Bradley knew exactly where to press. He mentioned stability, healthcare, mortgage rates. He framed the cut as mercy, the job as generosity. He spoke as if survival were a favor he could grant or revoke. This was not strategy. It was coercion dressed as governance, executed by someone who had never earned trust from a client or defended a signature under oath. As the pressure mounted, something clicked. In the noise of resentment, a memory surfaced. Inconvenient, an old appendix, pre-acquisition language, a clause written after a quiet departure years ago. When leadership learned the cost of underestimating leverage, I kept my face still, my voice neutral. But inside, the shape of the knife changed. Control arrived the moment I sat down and opened the old contract. Not the revised packet HR kept circulating, but the pre-acquisition agreement, scanned and saved years ago when caution still meant something. I read it without emotion, line by line, letting the noise fade. This wasn't nostalgia. It was inventory. The clause was there, exactly where memory said it would be. Buried in an appendix few people ever bothered to read. Any unilateral compensation reduction exceeding 20% immediately voided all transition, training, and knowledge transfer obligations. No carve-outs, no discretionary language. Clean, surgical. Written after leadership learned what leverage looked like in the wrong hands. I didn't tell anyone, not my team, not legal. Silence was part of the structure. I highlighted nothing, copied nothing, and closed the file. Control meant choosing when information existed. Instead, I drafted a short email to internal counsel, polite, curious, harmless on its face. I asked whether the proposed adjustment altered my reporting obligations during the transition period. No accusations, no conclusions, just a question that required a written answer. Then I waited. Waiting used to make me restless. Now it felt like alignment. The company ran on documentation. Bradley believed in paper the way some people believe in prayer. He responded within minutes. Confident and careless, he assured me, in writing, that all responsibilities would remain unchanged regardless of compensation adjustments. He CC'd HR, eager to close the loop and demonstrate control. I read his reply twice. Slowly, he had done exactly what I needed without realizing it. He had confirmed the reduction. He had affirmed the expectations. He had created a record that contradicted the contract he had never read. I replied once more, thanking him for the clarification and confirming receipt. No hint of resistance, no warning flare, just acknowledgement. When I closed my laptop, nothing dramatic happened. No relief, no triumph, just a steady sense of containment. The meeting earlier had been about power. This was about structure. Bradley thought authority lived in titles and approvals. I understood it lived in language, timing, and the discipline to stay quiet. 45 minutes sounds generous until you try to breathe inside it. I didn't rush. I lined the calls up like pieces on a board and moved them one by one. The first call went to an independent compliance attorney I trusted. Someone who had cleaned up other people's disasters without needing to announce it. I described the reduction, the expectations, the email. I asked one question, does confirming unchanged duties after a unilateral cut create exposure? There was a pause. Then a careful answer. It creates a record, she said. And records don't forget. The second call went to a risk advisor attached to one of our largest accounts. I didn't complain. I didn't vent. I asked whether sudden leadership-driven compensation shifts ever triggered vendor reviews. He exhaled slowly. They do when continuity is threatened, he said, especially when clients weren't informed. He didn't ask for names. He didn't need them. The third call was the quietest. An anonymous intake line for the Industry Ethics Council, a place executives pretended didn't matter until it did. I framed everything hypothetically. If a firm pressures a control holder to train a replacement after a coercive pay cut, is that compliant? The voice on the line stayed neutral. We log concerns like that, she said. Patterns are reviewed. I thank them all. No ultimatums, no warnings, just questions. Answered cleanly. When I hung up. The room felt smaller, like sound had been pulled out of it. My phone buzzed once with a confirmation tone I hadn't expected. One inquiry, the third, had been formally recorded. Not investigated. Recorded. 45 minutes ended without ceremony. I straightened a stack of papers that didn't need straightening and stood. Nothing visible had changed, but silence has weight when it's documented. And someone else had just written it down. I checked the time. Not because I was nervous, but because precision mattered. Every call had a timestamp, every answer a tone. In systems like ours, intent is invisible, but sequence isn't. I wasn't building noise. I was building a trail that could survive scrutiny later, without apology or haste. If you believe staying quiet, asking the right legal questions, and letting the system document itself was the right move, leave a single dot below. I'm curious to see who's standing with me. The tone changed without an announcement. An invitation appeared on my calendar, labeled clarification, sent by internal legal and copied wider than necessary. Bradley was asked to explain two things. In writing, why a 65% reduction had been imposed without performance cause, why client risk had not been disclosed prior to the decision. Process. Apparently, wanted answers from its favorite son. Bradley resisted immediately. He framed the cut as alignment, the timing as urgent, the clients as insulated. No material impact, he wrote. Confidently, continuity measures are in place. He suggested market pressure. He suggested precedent. He suggested that I had misunderstood the scope of my own role. Each sentence tried to climb away from responsibility and landed somewhere else. I said nothing. Silence was not passive anymore. It was structural. I watched the thread grow, watched legal ask again. More narrowly this time. Please specify who assessed downstream client exposure. Bradley named a committee that had never met. He CC'd HR. He invoked policy like a shield. The irony was clean. The same process he used to corner me now required precision he couldn't supply. Legal doesn't argue. It inventories. Each response tightened the box around him, one polite request at a time. Then the message arrived from outside the building. A formal note, routed through legal, stamped with a client logo I knew well. It asked for clarification regarding recent leadership and compensation changes affecting account oversight. It requested assurance of continuity. It requested it in writing. Bradley replied too fast. No changes affect delivery, he wrote. Again. I could almost hear the keystrokes. Legal forwarded the note to the thread with a single line. Please reconcile this with your earlier statement. I stayed still. I didn't correct him. I didn't volunteer context. I let process do what it does when fed contradictions. By the end of the day, the conversation had inverted. The questions were no longer about my compliance, but his judgment. Watching it unfold felt less like revenge and more like gravity, predictable, impersonal, and very hard to argue with once it starts pulling downward. Consequences never announce themselves loudly. They arrive as delays. The first sign was a contract that stopped moving. A signature scheduled for Thursday was paused pending review. A phrase that sounds neutral until you know what it costs per hour. No one blamed Bradley out loud, but everyone recalculated timelines. Revenue projections softened. Meetings grew careful. By noon, an internal audit was triggered. Routine on paper, surgical in practice. Compliance requested correspondence, assumptions, risk assessments. Bradley forwarded messages quickly, adding explanations that answered questions no one asked. I stayed out of it. Silence. Again. Did the work. I focused on my inbox, where nothing from legal required my voice. Bradley started calling. Once, twice, 3 times. The screen lit with his name while I let it dim. I wasn't avoiding him. I was preserving sequence. Every missed call recorded intent better than an argument. When he texted, "We need alignment," I read it and did nothing. The office felt thinner, like oxygen had been rationed. People spoke in corridors and stopped when footsteps approached. A calendar hold appeared for risk alignment, then disappeared. Another contract requested confirmation in light of recent developments. The words were polite. The implication wasn't late afternoon. HR entered the thread for the first time without Bradley copying them. Their tone shifted. They asked legal whether the reduction complied with policy, whether disclosures were required, whether exposure attached to role holders. They weren't defending him. They were defending themselves. I recognized the pivot immediately. Bradley called again. I declined again. The cost of arrogance isn't punishment, it's isolation. Process that once amplified him now asked for proof he couldn't summon. HR began documenting decision paths. Legal requested timestamps. The audit widened by a notch. When the day ended, nothing had collapsed. That was the point. Pressure accumulates quietly. I shut my laptop knowing the balance had tipped. Not because I spoke, but because the system had started asking who owned the risk, and Bradley was running out of places to point. By morning, the silence would invoice him, line by line, without witnesses or mercy ever again. Emails age differently than people do. They don't soften with context or apologize with time. They preserve intent exactly as it was typed. When legal began their review, Bradley's messages were pulled in sequence. Not selectively, not generously. Lines he thought were firm read as coercive. Phrases meant to sound decisive landed as threatening. "You are expected to comply" appeared more than once. "This is not optional" followed discussions about pay, about stability, about loyalty, in isolation. Each line could be defended, together. They formed a pattern. Pressure applied downward. Language calibrated for someone assumed to have fewer exits. The Risk Council joined quietly. No dramatic summons, just a calendar block and a request for documentation. They asked who approved the reduction, who assessed exposure, who authorized continuity without disclosure. They asked why mitigation plans referenced people rather than systems. They asked why urgency always traveled in one direction. I wasn't asked to speak. That was the cleanest part. Cold justice doesn't need testimony when the record is complete. I watched the thread narrow, watched Bradley's replies shorten. His tone changed first, then his certainty. He stopped using absolutes. He started using if and may. Late afternoon. A notice circulated with careful wording. Bradley Horn has been placed on temporary administrative leave pending review. No adjectives, no conclusions, just action. HR emphasized continuity. Thanked teams for professionalism. Reminded everyone not to speculate. I closed my email and stood, feeling nothing dramatic. This wasn't victory. It was resolution without heat. Emails don't forget. And neither do systems designed to protect themselves. Bradley had trusted authority to erase consequence. The archive disagreed, and for the first time since the paper crossed the table. The silence felt balanced. It settled in my chest as a precise calm. The kind that comes when accountability finally detaches from ego and moves, slowly and inevitably, toward its rightful address, without spectacle, apology, or need to speak. If you think Bradley's suspension was deserved, tap 3 below. I'm genuinely curious how many of you see it the same way. The meeting felt different before it even started. Bradley's name wasn't on the invite. No explanation, no substitution. Just an empty space where his authority used to sit. The room filled anyway, legal, risk. 2 board observers, people who usually arrived only after damage was done. This time, they arrived early. They asked me to walk them through the system. Not my title. Not my responsibilities, the system. How accounts were monitored. How compliance signals were flagged. How revenue and risk talked to each other without waiting for permission. I stood and explained it plainly. Without performance. I talked about redundancy, about escalation paths, about why certain controls lived with people instead of dashboards. I didn't mention Bradley once. No one interrupted. That alone was new. When questions came, they weren't defensive. They were curious. Why was this designed to sit outside HR oversight, one director asked. Because HR optimizes cost, I said. Evenly. This system protects continuity. A few heads nodded. Notes were taken, not aggressively carefully. I didn't ask for my role back. I didn't ask for compensation restored. I didn't ask for anything. Bargaining would have cheapened the moment. The system spoke for itself. And they were listening to it, not to me. That was the quiet satisfaction. I hadn't expected the realization that value didn't need to be argued anymore. A pause settled after I finished. Legal cleared their throat and summarized what had already become obvious. Decisions affecting controlled accounts had bypassed risk review. Client exposure had been underestimated. Internal pressure had replaced disclosure. The words were neutral, but the implications weren't. Then came the turn. One of the board observers leaned forward and asked, if this occurred once, where else might it exist? No accusation, just scope. The answer arrived without drama. We recommend expanding the review, legal said. Timeline. Communications. Adjacent decisions. No one objected. As the meeting ended, chairs moved, files closed, still no Bradley. I gathered my notes slowly, aware of the low, steady satisfaction building beneath my calm. This wasn't triumph. It was alignment. The system I built had finally been trusted to look beyond one person, and once it did, it wasn't finished yet. Clarity arrived without celebration. The decision posted quietly on the internal portal. Time stamped. Final. Bradley Horn's employment had been terminated effective immediately. No severance package, no transition window, no farewell note thanking him for service. Just a line about continuity and an instruction not to redirect inquiries. HR said nothing at all. I learned about it the same way everyone else did. Through silence. His calendar vanished. His access stopped responding. The authority that once filled rooms evaporated without echo. Process finished what it started and moved on. An hour later, an email reached me directly. Short, careful. Your compensation adjustment has been withdrawn. No apology, no explanation, just a reversal. As if the insult could be deleted the way it had been issued. The message ended with an invitation to discuss reinstatement under revised terms. I didn't respond immediately. I reread the sentence until it lost its weight. Withdrawn meant they understood the risk now. It meant the numbers had been recalculated, the exposure priced, the damage contained. It did not mean respect. When I finally replied, my answer was simple. I declined. I wrote that my decision wasn't emotional. It was procedural. A system that corrected itself only after pressure failed the test that mattered. I explained that reversing harm after it was documented did not erase intent. I thanked them for the clarification and wished them stability. There was no counteroffer. HR stayed quiet. Legal acknowledged receipt. That was the end of it. Walking back to my desk, I felt something settle that anger never could. Justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it shows up as alignment between record and outcome, between action and consequence. Bradley lost his career not because I demanded it, but because the structure he trusted finally reflected his choices accurately. And when they tried to hand me back what they had taken, I understood the last leverage I had left was refusal. That choice closed the door cleanly, without noise, and confirmed that dignity, once reclaimed, does not require permission from anyone. Not anymore. Not after the record spoke for itself. Leaving didn't feel like escape. It felt like alignment. I exited under terms that honored the contract, not the pressure, and the building released me without resistance. There were no speeches, no lingering looks, just a quiet transfer of access and a clean end to a chapter that had already closed itself. Weeks later, I stepped into a new role as a strategic risk advisor, advising companies before arrogance became expensive. The work was slower, sharper, and honest. I wasn't fixing damage anymore. I was preventing it. That difference mattered. They thought salary was leverage. They forgot integrity compounds faster. What stayed with me wasn't Bradley's fall or the emails that sealed it. It was the calm that followed. Justice didn't announce itself or ask for applause. It simply settled, permanent and precise, into the record. I smiled when I left. Not because I won, but because I didn't bend. Systems don't always fail loudly. Sometimes they fail by convincing good people to stay quiet, to accept less, to believe that dignity is negotiable if the spreadsheet says so. What this experience taught me is simple but not easy. Real leverage isn't volume, anger, or threats. It's clarity. It's knowing what you've built, what you protect, and where your lines are drawn before someone else decides them for you. I didn't win because I outshouted anyone. I won because I stayed still long enough to let the truth document itself. There's a human lesson here, too. Power often assumes the people beneath it have fewer options, fewer voices, fewer exits. That assumption is what breaks first. When one person refuses to bend quietly, it doesn't just protect them, it creates space for others to breathe. I still think about how many people stay in situations like that. Convinced endurance is the same as strength. It isn't. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have signed, argued, walked out, or waited, and watched the system reveal itself? There's no perfect answer, only the one you can live with afterward. And if you're listening right now, tell me where you're listening from. It reminds me this story isn't happening in a vacuum, that there are real people on the other side of it. If this story resonated with you, subscribing helps it reach others who might need it. A like or a share isn't just support for the channel, it helps this message travel further. Maybe to someone who's questioning their own worth at work today. By being here, you're already part of that change.